Hi everyone, good morning and welcome to our workshop on Flutterflow no-code development. So today's topic is integrating Open AI APIs into Flutterflow interface, and we are going to take an example of Dall-e's image generation model to demonstrate the same. So let me directly jump to the topic. I'll share my screen and do that. Okay, so let's move to the presentation mode. So yeah, this is the topic. We are going to do Flutterflow OpenAI integration, and of course that's a no-code platform uh, that we are working on. So what will we build? We'll use the image generation API called by OpenAI or Dall-e model in a web application. I have a pre-recorded video of the entire build, and I'll be using that to demonstrate how to build this application. Okay, so what's the process when we are looking at OpenAI integration? There are like few steps that are required. OpenAI has a repository on GitHub by the file name of openai.yaml GitHub file, and you can directly download and upload that in Flutterflow. It supports sort of a native integration where all the different types of APIs that OpenAI API has and has published on GitHub will get uploaded on Flutterflow. I'll add the link in the YouTube description so that you can easily locate that file and upload it on Flutterflow. Um, the second process is once you are done with that, there would be like scores of different types of API calls in that YAML file, and so you have to choose the relevant API. And for us, it will be image generation. It is good practice to just study the documentation also that is given in OpenAI. And so we will do the API call with a basic UI, and the third step would be to enhance the UI and API call with desired prompts and variables, like what kind of changes we can make in the standard API call that you get from the open API.yaml file. And yeah, and then test and publish. So this video is not going to focus on pre-setup of the project, etc. I have another video of a quiz app where you can have a look at how to set up Flutterflow projects, etc. We'll directly jump into the API integration part, assuming that Flutterflow setup is done, right? So now, before we move into this process, I just want to show a small demo of what we are going to eventually see being built, right? So let me just go to the video, right? So now, so this is the web application which is there, and you can see generate images with AI. I'm just going to play this part. So here you write the prompt of what you want. So yeah, a picture moon with stars and trees. I'm selecting the model size and generate image. Note that I've also integrated stability AI, but that is not the scope of this particular video. Probably some other time I'll share that as well. So you see there's a blurred thing that comes up, which I've set that if their API response is positive, then it comes up and you see the image being displayed now. Now you can open the image, you can save or whatever, however you want to do that, right? So now this is the second step which is coming. So that was the basic demo of the platform where you saw that the image was created using this API call, and if you click on the image, it expands into a web link where you can save the image or just copy the image from there, right? So now moving on to what are the steps to build this. Actually, the first step which I mentioned is to download the open API YAML file. So using the link, uh, let me just go there. So this is the link where you find the open API.yaml file, and you see download options with the three dots over here. So you can download the entire file in your local system, and then we will move to Flutterflow to upload it. So Now in Flutterflow, if you see the different options that are there, of course, you must be familiar with the build options if you have done some development on Flutterflow. But then there is this connect option where you see this icon where which is for API calls. So here itself, there is an option to upload these YAML files, and that is what we are going to use for today. So if you click on import Open API, and I've had that file saved and I've opened that. So now you see if like this entire API group has been uploaded with different types of APIs that Open API is providing, which is being create image or create image variation, create embeddings, create speech, etc., and all of that. And for the purpose of this call, we are going to use create image, but yeah, you can use other aspects as well. So now we have downloaded the Open API YAML file. Now, one thing which I mentioned earlier is always it's a good practice to study the documentation as well. While you will get the codes readily available in the YAML file, it is important that you study the documentation. So you can just search for Dall-e documentation or image generation documentation for OpenAI in the on the website platform.openai.com, and you can read about the different mechanics that are there. It provides you the code prompts, etc., as well, which you can directly integrate as well. So it's not that you are always dependent on this YAML file. You can directly integrate that as well. You'll have to select the curl option there to see how the code will appear for here. In our case, um, we already have this thing added over here. So you see this endpoint of image generations, right? Create image api.openai.com/v1/images chat generations. This is the API endpoint by which we'll be calling Dall-e and running the API calls. So if you study the body over here, um, it's a static body that they have given a prompt being a cute baby sea otter. They're using the model Dolly and Dall-e 3, n equal to 1, quality standard, and other things related to size, style, etc., and all of that. So we are not going to disturb anything right now. I will in the later of the session we will discuss how to edit these different options and set some variables that you want to set, but right now we are just going to let this be. So the other part that you see in this API call is the header, right, where it is asking for the authorization or the bearer token. This is where you need to pass your OpenAI secret key or the token that you get from the platform, that you will get again from platform.openapi.com, and which is something that is required for all the API calls that you are going to make. Right. So the other aspect that you see whenever you are looking at API calls, so first part was call definition, the second is response and test. So we have not hindered anything in the call definition part. We are directly looking at response and test. Now here, whatever variables has been set up, it will ask for those values. So you see it is asking for API key auth, which is set as a variable. Rest of it is static data that is going to get passed, so it is not asking any details over here. However, there is some problem that we are going to face when we uploaded this file. There are 4 errors that are showing in this different API configuration. Now, while our create image API call is fine, there are these errors are coming from certain other API calls, and it is important to resolve those, because if we don't, then Flutterflow will not allow you to publish the or even run the project as all. While this is not part of the scope of this video to go over these errors, but because when you will upload, you might also face these. So we will just look at how to resolve these errors as well. Right. So now in the errors, there were certain models that were mentioned, and I'm trying to search those. So just having a look at that again, list audit logs, right? And then there is modify user, where which is mentioned. So if I search for modify user and see what is the error that it is mentioning, where is so in brackets and URL paths, missing variables user underscore ID. So there are some variables which are missing, which is probably defined in the body but not defined in the variable section. So I'm just going to define those variables. This is the string, and save it. So yes, we see that one error has been resolved, so that 4 became 3. Similarly, I'm going to resolve another one as well, which is typing the project ID. We save and that gets resolved. There is another one for list audit logs. So we search for list audit logs. Now here there is probably some other issue, because the variables are defined, but these braces are probably causing a problem with those with the variable setup, right? So now it says variable project IDs with these braces is an invalid name, call name list audit logs, right? So I'll try to remove this project IDs braces and see if that works. Right, so I'm just removing this, save. Now it is giving me another error of event types braces is an invalid name, right? So now this we might have to fix all the variables that are there. So a shortcut that I'm going to use is just delete this particular API call, because we don't need this for image generation, right? So just resolving the last error, which is in again in modify project user. So we'll search for that. So we have added the variables that it asked for, and let's see if this resolves. Yes, those errors are resolved. So now we can actually get to the main part that we wanted to do, right? Now before we move on mm, to build or setting up the API flow, etc., and testing it out, uh, we also need to save the OpenAI key somewhere, which you will actually pass when the project is being called. So typically the way we are doing it is saving that in the app state. So this left hand side icon is where you save in app state. Important things to note are that it would be a string. Persisted would be true. Persisted means that it will save the data even if the app session has been closed. And the other important thing that you need to do is secure persisted fields, because this is important from a security point of view, so that your keys are not exposed to anybody, right? Because it is being saved in the app state, right? So there is a portion over here, default value, where you will add the key. Of course, that's hidden for the key that I've used is hidden over here. But yeah, so you just need to add the key over here, which again we will pass when we are setting up the UI workflows, etc. Right. So now moving on to the next step is we are going to create a small UI where we can test this out. So we have just added a container and a column. I've already done the setup with the menu, etc., which is not part of this particular video, right? Now in the column we are going to add a text field, right, where I can add the prompts. The next thing is we'll also add some drop down. Okay, first we are going to add form validation because that is something that you always do whenever you want to take some inputs and add some validation for the different inputs that you are taking. So this we are not configured the API call for these variables, but these are different variables that ultimately that I want to use, right? Where you saw in the final demo where size was used, and this button is for generating the image, right? Now we are going to set the actions for this particular button. So if you look at the first thing that we do is always check for form validation. So you validate the form 1, terminate if validation fails, and we are going to give an output variable name over here. We add a conditional. Okay, so we actually it's already stops if it is not validated, so we don't need to add that conditional over here. Um, so you see what we're doing over here is linking the API call. So we used the OpenAI API group call. Within that, it asked for the endpoint name, which was the create image endpoint that we wanted to use. And when we selected that, it asked for these variables, which is the API key auth. And over here in the API key auth, we added the app state variable, which we had just set up a few seconds before, right? So just showing this process again, set additional variable, API key auth, right? And the value is the app state. So in the app state, we have open API key, which we have added over here. Now we'll give an image, sorry, output name, which we can recognize, right? So Dall-e image creation is something that I'm putting over here. Now, once you're done with the succeeded, it automatically gives you two options of true or false, and you have to set different actions if the API call is a success or if API call is false, right? Now, to do that, first we are going to look at the API setup and test the response over there, and then come back to this and do the setup for true and false. So now in response and test, we just put this is the temporary test, and we are testing the API call with just the static data that is there and see what response we are getting. Perfect. So we got this success response from um, OpenAI, and it's a 200 success. So I've copied the URL and just to show that process and the output over here. So this is the JSON that was that we got as a response from OpenAI, and the URL is actually the URL where where the image is hosted, right? So now I've just copied this URL and opened the URL in another window to see if image is generated properly or not. So you see a really good quality image of an otter has been generated. That was the prompt. Now, while setting up API calls, right? So this is the second important part. As soon as you get a successful JSON response, you will get these recommended JSON path options from Flutterflow directly, right? So the first option that was there was of this data URL, which is the main thing that we need, which is the image URL. So it gives you the JSON path, and you can add a name of what you would want to link. So when we will be linking it to the UI that we have already built in the true and false actions, we are going to use these names over there, right? And you can use, sometimes in JSON path you will have like multiple entries. You may or may not use all of them. It depends on what all you want to actually use in the UI. Right now the most important thing for us is to use the image URL, which I'm adding. We will also add this $data, which is a revised prompt. So what Dall-e is also doing is that apart from the prompt that we gave, it is enriching the prompt and creating a revised prompt based on which the image is getting generated. And so we are going to add that JSON path as well, just to see if we might use that in the future, right? So you see there, we have named data.url as image URL, and we have added another JSON path and just naming it enriched prompt so that we remember what's there. Now we are going to save this so that these fields are saved, and we go back to the action editor, right? Now in this action editor, we need to save this URL somewhere so that we can display it. You can also display it directly, but I don't generally recommend that. I like to either save it in a page state or a component state, so that we are able to handle some of the null values or issues properly, and we are able to use that in anywhere else as well, right? So what we are going to do before we add an action intro, we are going to convert this small widget of prompts, etc., into a component. Components are basically reusable widgets in Flutterflow, and we are just going to see how to do that. You can leave it on the page itself and use it directly also, but the process that I'm going to demonstrate is by converting it into component so that you can use the same component in multiple pages. Right, so we go to this container, and we you'll see once we click on it, there's this option of where it says, just let me get back to that screen once. Right, so we were on this home page, we clicked on this container, and you can see this option of a diamond kind of an option on the right hand side, where which is being which if you click on it, it would ask for an option to convert as a component. So now when you do this and you click on create as component, you see that page disappeared and only this component remains, where image generation becomes the component. Whatever we created inside that of container, column, etc., is appearing as a component. The beauty of this is that this component you may use on this page, you can use it on multiple other pages as well. So I'm going to create a local component state variable. State variables work. Okay, just a background on component state variables in case there are people who are very new to Flutterflow. So, Flutterflow works with three types of state variables. One is app state variable, where we actually saved our OpenAI key. App state variables are available across the app. The second type is page state variables. If we were building on the page, then we would use page state variables which are accessible by the page. And the third type is a component state variable. So if you create a component, then you can define component state variables, and these variables will only be accessible by the component within that, right? So now I'm going to define a variable of generated image URL as a photo path, and this is something that we are going to use to save the URL that was generated by the API, and also going to use it to display the image. So it's an image path. We are going to do that. Now, another important factor to select over here is whether it is nullable or not. So if you're confused about this, the way to think about it is that when we are calling the API, we are generating this image URL, which means that the page state variable will have null value before the image URL is generated, right? So we need to define that it is nullable, right, and handle that case, and we will look at it how to handle that case, that if the value is null and we have that image window, how do we handle that so that it does not give you a null error, right? So we are going to define this as nullable. So over here we are going to update the component state. If you see add field, it shows me the generated image URL which we just now created. Now we are going to set the value for it. For setting the value, what you will get is these all these variables will be within the action output, right? So we are going to open the action output, and you see Dall-e image creation, API response. Now in API response, it is going to this JSON body, and there were different options over here, but we have chosen a predefined path because we already defined this image URL when we were setting the API call. If let's say you had not defined this variable over there, then the predefined path would have been empty, right? And then you would have to define it in a custom manner over here. So it's always a good practice to define these paths there itself, right? So we click on confirm. And for false, I are just going to add a snack bar where I want to pass on the sort of the error code that might have come from API, so that I know that if something goes wrong, what is wrong. So you see there is a status code by default the API would pass. So I can write that directly, or what I'm going to do is actually put it in a text, combined text, API call failed with status code, and then I'm going to put the status code from here, right? So I'm just putting this text combination as a snack bar. So yeah, so this is sort of the action setup, a basic action setup is done. Now I also do need to display the image, so I've added an image widget where I'm going to link the path to the component state variable actually. So we'll search for the component state variable and link the generated image URL that was stated. Now to handle value there, handle the null issue that is there, because till you click on the generate image button, this image will not be generated, right? So there are a couple of ways it can be done. One is adding a default variable value. So you can add a random image over there as well. But what we are going to do is we are going to use conditional visibility. We are going to put a conditional visibility that if this generated image URL is not set, then this entire widget will not be visible, and so it will not give me a null error, right? So let's just look at that, how to do that. So you go to conditional visibility, switch it on, put a condition, put a single condition, and in unset you select generated image URL, and Flutterflow gives these options. of where you can define whether it is set or not set, right? I'll just pause over there so that you can see that again, right? So you see the visible, what we have done is we have set it as generated. It will be visible only if the generated image URL is set, right? And now we are going to test it out. Just some UI changes. So if you notice right now, we have not linked the prompt or the size or anything to the API call. We are directly using the API call, which was given in a static manner in the Open API YAML file. So what is going to happen is that it will just use that prompt and display something, and then we'll come to how to set those variables and set the form part, etc. So just for the sake of putting this in, because we have put form validation, I'll just do this and generate image, right? And let's see what it shows. Perfect. So it created an order. If you remember the prompt, the static prompt that was there in the API call was of an order, and it did that job. So my API call is set up in a very basic manner, right? Okay. So now before this moves very fast, let me just explain this next part of it. So now, of course, you do not want to see an order every time, right? These are static values that are there. You would want to like set the you would want to set variables where you are entering this prompt, or you might also want to change the model. You might want to change the size, etc. Right? So the way to do that is first we define variables in this API call, right? So we go to the variable section and we add these variables. So first, of course, is the image prompt that I want to add. The image prompt will be a string. It's not a list, right? We add another variable of image size. Again, it's a string, and we save, right? So now once we are done adding these variables need to be linked with with the prompt or the JSON code that we are sending, right? And it is a very simple drag and drop thing that you need to do. You need to pick the variables and drop it where you want, right? So just be careful in not removing the braces if it is a string, right? So if you see, I put image prompt variable within that string and I've removed that order thing, right? Now we are going to put the image size, and I'm going to remove this hard-coded image size as well. And yeah, so we are going to leave the other things as of now. I think we'll add the model as well. Yeah, so we add the model and remove Dall-e 3, and we save this, right? So now before we link it to the UI, we would want to test this out. So we go to response and test. So now you see, apart from Open API key auth, it is asking for all these different variables, right? So we are going to just put different data points over here to see and test if this is working fine. So this is the open AI documentation from where we'll take the size. Then it is asking for the model. The model has to be the exact structure in which they have defined, which is small caps in Dall-e hyphen e comma 3. So we have added this. Now let's just test the response. Test API call. Okay, I messed up the URL, so you can also pick it from the raw body. Yeah, so you copy this and let's test if it gives us perfect. So instead of the otter, now we are having the image of the moon, which is a variable. Now the next step is that we have defined these different variables, etc. We are going to now link these variables in the UI that we created. We are just going to save this so that all the variables are saved, right? So now for linking the variables, first we need to take that as an input. So we are going to set the drop down. So the first option was 1024 cross 1024. Second option is I think of a portrait mode 1024 cross 1792. So I'm just going to probably copy from here. Right. And the third option is 1792 cross 1024. So I've added another drop down where we are going to select the model and we are going to pick again from the documentation what are the options we want. The second one is Dall-e 2. We'll remove this size thing and I'm going to set some validation rule, right? So in yeah, it's a good practice to just name the drop down so that we are able to recognize it properly. So this is select size, this is select model, text field is the prompt. Right now I go to the form and I just want to ensure that this is validated, but I don't want to add any additional actions to over there. So on the in the prompt, one thing to be careful about is that if let's say you are exposing this to external audience, they might write very long prompts and your tokens that get consumed by Open AI depend on that, right? So, so I'm going to only allow 500 characters and I'm going to put a minimum threshold of 50 characters so that the prompt is actually good quality and not some random stuff that is written, right? So no text validator, select model, we are just going to check and in generate image we already have this component state update, etc. Now we need to set the additional variables, right? So this is again an important part. You see, apart from API key auth, you need to pass on the additional variables, which would be in the widget state of the form. So in the form, you see prompt. Then the second thing is image size. We go to widget state again, select size, select model, again widget state, and we put the select model, right? So now my variables are set. So this is sort of done and we can now test it and see what happens, right? So waiting for this. So let's write a prompt here. Okay, it's asking for minimum 50 characters, which means the form validation is working. So we are just going to enhance the prompt a bit. Okay, I'm not sure if it is still not 50 characters. Yeah. So cricket everywhere. So maybe that 50 needs to be dumbed down to maybe 10, 20 characters. So there is some issue. So we had a snack bar. So that's why I've minimized it to see what the issue. So API call failed with status code 400, right? So there is some issue that we are facing over here, right? So let's see what is the meaning of that 400, or if we have done any errors while setting this up, right? So I've intentionally left some of these errors that are there in the video, because that's what happens when you start building any project, right? You face some of these things that are there. So 400 is basically saying a bad request error 400. There was an issue processing the request, so it's not giving me much information. So we have to figure out what is happening here. Right, so we have selected the select size. We have selected image prompt correctly. We have also selected the model correctly, and these are the changes that we did from our last iteration, where we were seeing this properly. Now if you notice, there's one mistake that we have done in the size part, where there was a capital X, and probably that caused an issue. So and the second thing was, which is again, it is not in this video, was is that Dall-e 2 does not have um, mm, a model or sorry, a size input. It gives a standard size, right? So it does not have different size options. So that is also something to be managed, right? Which we are not covering in this video, but I'm just sharing that for information. Right, so I'm using the standard size of 1024 by 1024, so see if it is working or not. And then it generates the image. So it expanded, which means that something has been generated. I think it's just taking a bit of time to load. Yeah. So you see that image has been generated. Of course, Dall-e 2's image quality is far inferior compared to what you would see in Dall-e 3. But that's the choice of models that you can have. So yeah, so this is the entire integration, where you would integrate a simple UI with Open AI. Pretty straightforward. I think you can complete the entire thing in a couple of hours, right? And use different types of API calls to generate images or other things, right? Just to do a recap of the process, I'll just take to the presentation and just talk about the steps that were there, right? So the what the first thing that we did was we went to the OpenAI YAML file, and we downloaded it and set it up on Flutterflow, right? It was just there were a few errors that came, and the video talks about how to resolve those errors. The step two was to set up the API call in Flutterflow with a basic UI. We did not change anything in the prompts, etc. We just wanted to test first whether the API call is working or not, and we got a successful result there. And then the next step was to integrate all the variables, right? So we integrated all these image prompt, model, image size variables. We still left a lot of variables, but that was to give you an idea. If let's say you want to integrate style and other things as well, feel free to do that, right? But this was just to give you an idea of how to do it, right? And in these three steps, and setting up the conditional actions, etc., we were done, right? And so finally, the result that you see is something like this, right? Where you have this prompt. This is my website where I've also integrated stability AI as well. But that was not something that we covered in this. Maybe we'll create another video for stability AI, how to do that, right? And selecting the size model prompt over here, demo you have already seen. Okay, so that was it. Thank you, folks. Thanks for joining in, and hopefully the other video will be on stability AI. Do drop in comments what are the other things that you would like to see with respect to API calls or any other web application that you want to build using Flutterflow. Thank you very much.